Good day, everyone, and welcome to another series of the Animal Welfare Group Nigeria. And it's so interesting to have you join our program. And briefly, the mission of the Animal Welfare Group Nigeria is to increase awareness of animal behavior and welfare, to foster collaboration among stakeholders in animal welfare, and thirdly, to educate stakeholders on the importance of animal welfare. I am Dr. Yasiri Oluwaseun. I am an associate professor at the Federal University of Agriculture, Belgium, Nigeria, and a George Foster Experience Research Fellow at the Humboldt Universitat zu Berlin in Germany, and I'm also the coordinator of the Animal Welfare Group Nigeria. Today we have in our midst Pralle, and she'll be talking about a topic which is so interesting and special, bringing specialities from the animal science and also from the music industry. She'll be talking about the topic, do animals like music? Understanding the use of music for animal welfare. And our moderator for today's session is Paul Downsey. He will be moderating the webinar for us. So with that, feel free to drop your questions in the chat box. We want the meeting to be as engaging as possible. And also, if there is time at the end, we'll be happy to open the floor for further discussion. Thank you so much, and I hope you find today's meeting so insightful. I would like to hand over to the moderator to continue with the program. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here, and I'm sure that everyone here is also excited to be in this meeting. Dr. Pralle, you're welcome. Dr. Yasiri, thank you for the introduction. My name is Paul Downsey. I'm a master's student and a research assistant at the Red Meat Laboratory of the University of Arkansas. As an animal scientist, a part of me that people may not really know is the fact that I also play the flute. So before we continue to the presentation properly, I would like to entertain this audience with a short performance. The song title is Lions, The Lions Sleep Tonight. It's a song from a movie. So I hope you enjoy it. Thank you. Yeah. So I hope everyone can hear me. Okay. Thank you so much for the for granting the permission to perform that. Um, so without wasting much of our time, I'll go straight into the biography of our presenter, and at the end of the biography, should begin the presentation, and we expect that we keep note of our questions so that at the end of the presentation we drop them in the chat section, or probably if the time permits, we give the opportunities for you to give your questions or comments um, live like this. So to the biography. Dr. Pralle is a behavioral biologist who currently works as a postdoctoral researcher at the Catholic University Leuven in Belgium to discover new relationships between sound and health. She obtained a PhD in psychology in the year 2016 from the Western University in Canada, where she studied the effects of early life stress on the behavior and physiology of songbirds. Her interest in comparative bioacoustics emerged during her postdoctoral fellowships at the Leiden University and the University of Amsterdam from 2013 to 2016. Dr. Pralle continued to expand our understanding of the effects of early life stress on the brain, health, and longevity during her positions as both a postdoctoral researcher at the University of St. Andrews and as a research fellow of the Marie Curie Individual Fellowship at the University of Glasgow. She currently works with the M3 Bowers Group at the Catholic University Leuven to uncover vocal signatures of positive emotional states in poultry and penguins. She aims to combine her knowledge in comparative bioacoustics and health to grow the studies on music for animal welfare in a mature scientific field that is theory-driven and interdisciplinary. Thank you so much. So over to you, Dr. Pralle.
Thank you very much for that introduction and also the lovely performance. I think this is the first talk I've given where it's been preceded by a performance, so very memorable. Thank you. Yeah, then I will start. So thank you again for inviting me to be a speaker at the Animal Welfare Group Nigeria webinar series. I'm really honored to be here. And yeah, so the question I'd like today about whether animals like music is something that I've been interested in for quite a while now. And it's quite a difficult question to tackle. So today, what I would like to talk to you about is a way I decided to approach it recently. And this information is still very new to me. So I do apologize in advance that the slides will be rather word heavy. I haven't had time to really adapt it into nice pictures yet, but hopefully you find it interesting anyways. Okay. So I think we should start our talk with why are we even interested in this question? Why does it matter if animals like music or they don't? So I think this is a question that is relevant for several different fields, including biomusicology, in which the aim is to uncover the evolution of human music capabilities. So if we understand whether, for example, some of these capabilities exist in animals, we also understand the trajectory of the evolutionary trajectory of these traits in humans. And amongst things that are universal, I suppose, in music, perception and production, enjoyment is one of them. So I think in any culture where music is made, music is enjoyed. So that level of universality suggests there may be something biological about it. It's embedded somewhere in our biology, and that may be shared with other animal species. sorry, I want to mention that when I say animals, I mean non-human animals, and I just use the word animals from now on. Knowing if animals like music is also interested for a field of zoomusicology, in which they're interested in animals' perception and production of their own sounds. So I think understanding of animals like human music allows us to compare at least some sort of, at a perhaps aesthetic level, perception of an animal's music versus human music. And finally, of course, it's also an important point for animal welfare, because if we understand more about music, if animals like it, how animals interact with it, and why, for example, it works in some cases to improve welfare, then we can understand how to best use music as environmental enrichment. So I wrote a paper in 2002 conceptualizing as a framework for this and critically reviewing the work that's been done in this area. And one of the things that is important is, of course, that music is not a magic bullet. It's not going to cure every disease possible. So what you need to have is a very specific welfare goal, and you have to connect that with what the animal can hear, and also what your music sounds like. So in this case, if your goal is, for example, to improve, I guess, positive and increase positive emotional states in animals, then understanding whether they actually like music and enjoy it, of course, is it's one way to clearly show that yes, music can be used to increase positive emotional states in animals. Music can also be used in cases, even if animals don't enjoy them. For example, just masking background noise. If there is construction or whatever sounds happening and that's stressing out the animals, we can put music on that masks the noise. Animals don't even have to like it to benefit from it. So in this case, understanding if animals like music allows us to use it in these specific cases where we think that they would benefit from enjoying it, rather than just having it in the background. I think it also answers a question of a deep cultural fascination with the idea that music has some magic-like qualities that animals find enchanting. And you can see this in myths and folktales across the world. Two of the examples I've included here are Orpheus. So in here, it's a depiction of Orpheus playing his lyre, and he's just playing it in such a beautiful way that all the animals come, they sit by him and they're docile, and they're listening to the music because it's so beautiful. Another popular example is the Piper of Hamelin. So in this story, the town is overrun with rats. They don't know what to do. This guy comes in, he says, "I'll fix your rat problem." And he does by playing his pipe. So when he plays his pipe, all the rats follow him, even to their death. So again, these are just examples of culturally how this connection that we feel between music and animals' attraction to it. But there hasn't been a systematic investigation on whether animals actually like it. And part of the reason is, I think it's quite difficult. It depends on how you define liking. And that's what I'll get to next. So what does it mean to like music? So for this talk, and for now, I've defined liking music as reward and pleasure-related responses resulting from music. So at a behavioral level, it's associated with motivation to listen to music. So for example, you approach the music source, you spend time in the areas where you can hear the music, or you actively ask for music by turning on or triggering playback. You can also like music at the level of the brain. So in this case, I define it as activity of neurochemicals and brain regions involved in processing pleasure and reward. Things specifically, for example, concentrations of dopamines and opioids in the neural reward system, which is distributed throughout the brain at the cortical, limbic, and striatal regions. I can explain a little bit more about the, I suppose, neuroscience of this, but for the sake of this talk, we just limit it to that we know that dopamine is involved in reward signaling. We know that opioids are also involved in reward and pleasure signals. And that there is neural reward systems that, at least across mammals, seem pretty well conserved. I think also some of the basic components are all conserved in birds. So why should we define liking of music this way? For one thing, it's because it mirrors what is found in music enjoyment in humans. So in humans, listening to music, and when participants report that listening to music is nice and enjoyable and pleasurable, these activate the same reward systems and pleasure systems as enjoyment of things, basic other things like food, sex, and drugs. Again, specifically, dopamine and opiate manipulations can affect reported levels of human enjoyment of music. Humans also actively seek music. You know, we go and we turn on the radio, we go and we turn on our Spotify playlist. So again, this is this behavior of or we hear something, a concert, like a live concert, and we go towards it. So the fact that we are actually motivated to hear it is another reason why I think I've defined liking music this way at a behavioral and a neural level. Also, reward and pleasure are important components of positive emotional states. And if you're trying to understand whether, for example, music induces a positive emotional states in animals, reward and pleasure are tangible ways to address this, because we at least have the neurobiology relatively well understood in some animals, and because there are behaviors that are quite well connected to it. Motivation behaviors, for example. So for the rest of most of the rest of this talk, I'll talk about a systematic review that I'm currently doing right now on whether animals like music in the way I've defined it. And some of the questions which I'm going to talk about here right now, although there will be more in the future, I hope, there are three of them. So one of them is, do animals like music or music-like sounds more than other types of sounds, or no sounds at all? Do they like specific types of music or music-like sounds? And does music or music-like sounds increase, let's say, reward processing in the brain? So in this, that would, for example, suggest that animals do find music rewarding, at least at a neural level. They like it in the brain. So, so far I've done a review through Web of Science, and I'm going to put here the inclusion criteria. It's a lot of text, but I think it's important to talk to you about so you understand what I've been looking for. So the inclusion criteria means that studies in which I included as part of my literature review. So one, it has to be published in a peer-reviewed journal. It has to be a study, and of course, on non-human animals. It has to be original research, so reviews and opinions and stuff don't count. The study has to manipulate the acoustic environment by presenting music. The study has to use music or stimuli that contain some of the features of music. So for example, it uses pure tones that have a particular rhythm. Or for example, it uses other, even just pure tones that have that mimic a property of harmony in human music, or for example, a particular melodic sequence. And the study has to report attraction, approach, or engagement with the music producing device or location, and or preference for choice for music over other types of music, or no sound, but also between different types of music. So that's all or. The study can also report brain dopamine or opioid levels and or neural activity. So for example, immediate early gene expression in neural pathways, for example, the mesolimbic dopamine reward pathway. And this can occur during or after music exposure. This now they'll talk about what I didn't include. So things that I decided not to assess as part of the question of whether animals like music in the way I've defined it. So studies reporting positive behaviors during or after music exposure. And I thought about this for a while, but I didn't want to include it because in most of these studies, at least as far as I've read, it's not clear if these positive behaviors are the result of actually listening to the music, or because of, for example, music has created an environment in which they're more free to express these behaviors. Again, I mentioned that music is often used as a masking stimulus. So if there's undesirable noise in the back, you cover it with music, and the animals are no longer, let's say, scared by sudden loud noises caused by construction. So in this case, when you're playing music, these studies haven't really controlled this aspect of it. We don't know whether, for example, if your animal demonstrates more play behavior after music, if it's because it actually likes the music and it finds it pleasurable and it finds joy in it, or again, that it's just that the environment is now safer and nicer, so it will express these behaviors. I also don't include studies that use music as a cue for a subsequent event. So for example, often in operant learning tasks, and I don't include studies where music exposure is given concurrently with other stimuli or manipulations. So for example, a pairing of music with drugs, or music during periods of acute or chronic stress. So these are on, let's say, normal animals. Okay. So far, I've screened 268 articles, and I'm reporting the result on 32 of them. 27 of them are related to behavior, 5 of them are related to the brain, and I do want to say that there are no studies that link the brain and behavior. So there are no studies showing that approach behavior to a music or spending more time with listening to music actually affects, let's say, increases dopamine in the brain. And just to remind you that these are the 3 questions I wanted to ask. Is it, do animals like music more than other types of sound, or even no sound? Is there a certain type of music that they like, or different animals like? And is there evidence of, let's say, brain liking of music in animals? Okay, so move on to the results. Do animals like music or music-like sounds more than no sounds? So you see these 3 bubbles. 4 refers to, so the blue refers to yes, the orange refers to no, and 2 is in the middle. And I will put up some of the species here. So the 4 studies in which they find that, for example, animals will approach or spend more time in or ask for music have been found in 4 out of, 16 studies. And they find it in a sea bream, a lovely fish, the chimpanzee, the rhesus monkey, and the pig. On the other hand, there are 10 studies that find that animals don't care. They either like other sounds more, or they like no sound, actually. If you give them a choice between listening to nothing versus listening to music, they would actually prefer to listen to nothing. And these are a whole range of species. So we have the cotton-top tamarin, we have the rat, the goldfish, orangutan, gorilla, mouse, white-faced saki monkeys, budgerigars, domestic chicken, and the chimpanzee. Of course, I haven't put them all up here, but you can see that it's quite a spread. And the 2 in the middle here are 2 studies that are interesting because they kind of say yes and no. So if they test, these ones are both in mice, actually. So if they test adult mice and they say, do you like music versus no music? Then the adults are just like, no music, no music, no music, no. But if they expose the rats to music, or actually any sound, any type of sound, it could be, I think they said, like banging a piece of wood onto something during a specific period in their early life, then they will prefer that at a particular stage later in their life. So for example, if they exposed the mice to music during, I think it's postnatal day 10 to 20, and they test them 2 months later, the rats will much prefer to go to the area where there is this music that they've heard in early life compared to the no music area. But again, this is not specific to music. It can be any sound in particular. So this is why this kind of sits here, because yes, they do prefer it, but in fact, they prefer any sound that you expose them during that period. Okay, just to make sure I don't miss anything here. So in this case, I mean, again, the evidence is mixed. Sometimes you do get some species, sometimes not. And I think the interesting question now is to look at then why? What are the variations here? And I'd like to look into, for example, age effects, since the mice study suggests that there is an age effect of exposure. I'd like to look at things as well, such as sex. I know some studies, especially in the rodent literature, they only look at males, for example, or only females. So perhaps there is a sex effect here. And maybe even the type of music stimuli used, whether, for example, it's it's like full musical piece, or it's, again, bits of features of music. So the next question is, do animals like specific types of music? And of course, one way to do this is to do this by genre. But I don't think that this is very informative for many reasons, because one, genre is something that's a very human construct. Our understanding of genre, we understand genre because we listen to music, but genre is meaningless to an animal. Also, this is again a problem when you don't have musicians involved in animals, in studies on music for animals, is that the way people classify different genres or use examples of music from different genres, there's no consistency there. And genres itself are an extremely heterogeneous category. So a musicologist described to me like they're basically clouds. They're clusters, and there's a lot of overlap between different clusters. So a piece of, let's say, heavy metal can incorporate bits of opera into it. And if that's what you say is heavy metal, that's going to be very different from another piece of heavy metal that, for example, doesn't include opera. It's going to sound quite different. So that's why I didn't do genre. And later you'll see that there are studies that focus on a specific piece of music, which allows for more easier comparison. I tried to look at things like whether they have, for example, they're comparing things like rhythm and tempo, but as far as I can tell, there aren't enough studies to really do a meaningful comparison. The only one I've found so far is this comparison of consonance and dissonance. So that's a component of harmonies. For example, if you play a chord on a piano, often some people report that this chord sounds nice. It's like ding, like a happy sound. And then other ones, when you play it, it sounds like a bit menacing. And or if you've played a wrong chord, for example, it just sounds wrong. So this is the concept of consonance and dissonance and in harmony, which is really important for Western tonal music. And so what do we find here again is a bit of a mix, is that some species, the chimpanzee, the rat, and the chick, will prefer sounds that tend to be more consonant, or melodies that have more of these consonant sounds. But there are also animals such as the tamarin, the rat, the budgie, and the frog that don't really care about it. It doesn't matter if it's consonant or not. They prefer consonant just as much as dissonant. It's interesting though that there are no studies showing that dissonant is preferred. I'll talk about later about what this might mean. But again, quite a spread and a lot of, I think, individual variation here. And there is no pattern in terms of species. So for example, it's not that all non-human primates prefer consonants or all mammals prefer consonants. Of course, it's very much all over the place. Finally, does music or music-like sounds increase activity in the brain reward systems? For this, there were 5 studies. 4 of them were in rats. 1 of them is in fish. Just to note that all of these studies use Mozart. So either Mozart K448 or Mozart K205. So basically Mozart is king when it comes to studies on music and animal brain and dopamine. But just to keep this in mind, also the studies compare 2 conditions, a music condition and a no music condition. So they don't add any sound, which I think is problematic because it doesn't have to be Mozart necessarily that's having any effect on the brain. It's just adding sound to the environment has an effect, right? So just keep that in mind when I'm talking to you about these studies. Also, as far as I found, only dopamine has been studied, so no opioids, and it can be measured at the level of the whole brain, so the concentrations of dopamine in the whole brain, in larger sub-regions of the brain, or really specific areas. But across all studies, they find that yes, music, or at least Mozart, increases dopamine levels or transmission or metabolism in the brains of both rats and fish when compared to a control condition in which no sound has been added. I do want to bring up that from one of these studies, again, it's a kind of a questionable finding, is that dopamine increased in some areas of the ventral striatum. Again, that's part of the reward system. but not in the nucleus accumbens and insular cortex, which are also part of the reward systems. So again, it's no clear picture, sorry. But yeah, again, these results I would take with a grain of salt, given what I've told you about the fact that they only use Mozart and they compare it, music and a no music condition. And most of it in rats and are in rats. So just to summarize very quickly, what we find is that most animals behaviorally, they don't seem to like it, but of course there are some. And why, why are we getting this, at least between species variation and perhaps also between individual variation? Well, I think it's because music is usually a novel and biologically irrelevant stimulus for animals. They don't care about it. Music for us is really important because we grow up with it. It's attached to many, it's attached to social function, it's attached to social identity. You know, like it's for us, it reminds us of things, so it can bring back memories, it can bring a lot of things. So music for us it's very important to us. But for animals, especially if they're listening to human music, which is arguably music made for humans by humans, then it's not as relevant. And there is a lot of evidence now suggesting that one of the reasons humans report enjoying music is it because music has this balance of predictability and surprise. So that being able to predict what comes next in the music is really important in being able to enjoy it. And of course, if it's all predictable, then it becomes boring. So there's this kind of, again, this balance of kind of knowing what's coming next, but sometimes being pleasantly surprised. And that's part of the reason why we like music anyways. We love music because, yeah, it's like we kind of know what's coming. And then we're like, ooh, we were surprised. So I don't know whether this occurs in animals, right? Whether, for example, if animals like music, the ones that show music liking, whether they like it because of the same reason, that they're able to predict in a way what's coming next, and that this prediction itself is enjoyable. In relation to consonance and dissonance, again, the results are the same. Some animals seem to like consonance more than dissonance, but many are indifferent. And again, none of them like dissonance more than consonance. Why? Why do we see these patterns? And I think it would be interesting to look into the relevance of these frequency ratios. So consonance versus dissonance differs depending on the ratio between the frequencies played simultaneously. It'd be interesting to look at the importance of frequency ratios in their own communication systems. So what role do these play? So for example, the vocal similarity hypothesis by Bowling and Perov suggests that the reason we like consonant sounds or sounds more is because these are the sounds that are more prevalent in speech. So in for example, English language, there's a particular ratio of sounds that occurs very, very, very often in English. And because it's a very, very relevant, and because speech is such a relevant signal, and this occurs so much in speech, our brains have come to decide, well, this is important, therefore I like it. And then you tend to dislike sounds, speech sounds, in which the frequency ratio occurs less often. And that this will depend on the language that you're exposed to, which is why consonants perception, or at least what sounds are perceived as consonant, can differ cross-culturally. So yeah, so I think it would be interesting to try to look at this vocal similarity hypothesis in animals, whether animals would find frequency ratios that are common in their own communication systems more enjoyable. They approach it much more than frequency ratios that are less common in their communication systems. And finally, in relation to the brain, I think there isn't enough evidence to say whether animal brains actually like music. Again, given the shortcomings that I mentioned, what I think we could say potentially is that animals may be learning during passive music exposure, and that this might be rewarding. So a lot of dopamine, of course, is involved in reward, but it's actually also involved in different things, such as learning. Dopamine is really, really important for learning. So if I didn't mention, but a lot of the studies also look at dopamine activation in the hippocampus. And the hippocampus, again, is important for learning. And we also see a lot of activity of dopamine in the hippocampus, suggesting that it is also related somehow to learning. But importantly, we need studies comparing non-Mozart music to non-music sounds as well. So we have to have other music other than Mozart, I think. Otherwise, all we can say is that Mozart makes rat brains happy. And that we need to compare, we also have to have that positive control, where there is sound present, but it's not music. So finally, some points to consider. These are our last points to consider here, is that, of course, this is not the only way to define the liking of music. I've defined it this because I think it provides, again, a good way to start to understand whether animals like it or not. But there are many ways of defining liking music. The way I've defined it behaviorally, approach or proximity to the music source is not always related to reward, pleasure, and motivation. So, for example, if you have aggressive encounters, animals move towards each other to fight. I don't think that's particularly pleasurable. In many birds, they sing to mark their territory. And if they hear another bird in their territory, they will approach that too. Again, it doesn't sound something that it's related to pleasure or reward. Longer listening may also be related to curiosity. And sometimes curiosity is, I think, rewarding, but some of the big brains in the field suggest that curiosity can also be a negative state, a state of information deficit. So, for example, I often see that if there has been a traffic accident, people crowd around it, right? People will stop to look. And I don't think it's particularly pleasant, but it's a way of acquiring more information. So defining it as approach, triggering, or longer listening, again, it's not a surefire way of measuring reward, pleasure, motivation. As I mentioned before, measuring dopamine in the brain is also not a surefire way of saying that it's involved in reward, because dopamine is also involved in learning, although learning is often rewarding itself. So I would say that there. Like I said before, that there are no studies linking behavioral liking with neural liking. I think this is really important. It's something that we're missing here, and it would be really nice to do. Finally, there's also the social aspect of music, and I don't know if I'm using the term musicking correct here, but that listening to music, the idea of us as a passive listener, is a relatively recent social construct. So often music, you don't just sit back and listen to music like you do in a concert hall. Often you participate in the music as well. So I'm not sure, for example, whether producing any sound, music-like sound, would be rewarding, or simply participating in making music-like sounds is rewarding. I have some suggestions of that in other animals. For example, the European starling, they're seasonal breeders, and they use their song to attract mates and stuff in the breeding season, but they also sing outside the breeding season. And in this case, it's not at a female or anything. It isn't. It's we're not sure what the purpose of it is. It's like a social song, but we're not sure what it does. And in this case, what they found is that it is pleasurable. The bird likes to sing, at least in the brain. What happens when they sing is you get, again, activation of dopamine and opioids in these reward centers. So it's nice, like birds like to sing, even if it's not at a particular female or something. I think we also, again, have some anecdotal evidence of animals enjoying participating in making sounds. So, for example, if you have a dog or at home or something, and you're making a lot of noise or listening to music where everyone is kind of making noise, the dog will often join in. And you have lots of these cases of singing dogs at home. So again, I don't know, and it doesn't matter how horrible it sounds, as long as they're participating, that seems to be important, and maybe that's the part that's enjoyable. So I think that this is also stuff that we need to consider when we consider the liking of music. It's not just simply listening, but there are many aspects that might be enjoyable about music. Also, just a small point is that, can we say that the liking of a type of music, or music in general, actually applies to an entire species? So often, like the title is chimpanzees like, I don't know, African and Indian music more than Japanese music and silence. Can we treat preference at a species level? I don't know. I don't think so. And I don't know. I don't have a solution to it, but I do think that, of course, there are individual variations, and it's more important to understand the cause of those than to simply blanket statement that, yes, chimps enjoy this type of music, or dogs enjoy this type of music, because I think there is so much individual variation there. Again, it's just something to think about. For my last slide, I'm sorry if I'm a little bit over time. For my last slide, this is kind of things that I want to, questions that I think are really important to ask in the future, is to pursue both the proximate and ultimate causes of animal music enjoyment, why animals would like music. As I mentioned before, I think it would be really, really interesting to do studies on whether animal brains actually they're able to predict what comes up next in music, and that this prediction somehow is enjoyable for them. And in this case, it would be a very nice parallel between animal music enjoyment and human music enjoyment, because at least we know that this is what is happening in humans. And the question, we can ask the same question in animals: is this what's happening in animals? And that's an approximate cause. For those of you not familiar with proximate and ultimate, this is part of Tinbergen's levels of explanation. So proximate refers to things like, mechanisms, like neural mechanisms, and the other one is ontogeny. Ultimate causes are more related to adaptation and function, and phylogenetic variation between different species. So in addition to understanding whether prediction is pleasurable, and if animals do it, it would be also really important to understand the role of early life experience and passive exposure, massive passive exposure to music, in allowing animals to learn to predict events. So if you think about it, we're exposed to music pretty much since birth, right? Music, and we hear a lot of it passively. And it's from, I think, this exposure, the fact that it starts in early life and accumulates over time, that we're able to form structures and themes about what is coming next. If you've ever heard a piece of music that is very different from the type of music you're used to, often people will describe it to me as, I don't understand it. And I think that's exactly it, is your brain it doesn't know what to predict. It doesn't know what's coming next. And this creates a bit of a confusion for you. And then there's this negative feeling, oh, I don't like it because I don't understand what's happening in music. I realize I haven't put an ultimate cause there, but we can talk about that later. But these are both proximate causes. There are also ultimate causes, which is music as social bonding. That would be really interesting to understand whether music evolved in humans because it allowed humans to social bond. So whether we see evidence of that in non-human animals as well. Finally, I want to make one final point about the importance of interdisciplinary collaborations on this topic. So often in these studies on animal and music, you get animal scientists and very little musicians or people who understand music. And it's very strange because you're incorporating two parts, music and animals. So we would find it strange if there was this study on music and animals that didn't include any people who worked on animals. So I find it equally strange that in these studies, there's nobody that works specifically on music. And for example, musicians are important, musicians, musicologists, scholars, practitioners. They're important for things like understanding what features of music might be important. So again, the problem potentially with genre, playing genres and concluding animal preferences for genres, what might we manipulate instead of just playing genres? We could manipulate basic things like pitch and tempo, but there are so many other aspects of music that we could manipulate that I think, of course, we need someone who understands it to help us to clarify what might be the most important ones to tackle. Having a musician involved, or music people involved, also helps us make better studies. So for example, the reporting of the music itself, often what I see is either a category, radio music, which makes it very difficult to replicate and to understand what is being played. Or for example, they give simply the title of the piece. Yeah, Mozart K488. And that's all they report. And, again, if I don't have a music background, so for me, that was fine. But to a musician, it's not. And I'll just give you one example. So somebody suggested to me that they should also report the performer, who it was performed by. And I said, why? Why does that even matter? And this is a reason why. So for example, if your favorite song is played by your artist and suddenly Britney Spears decides to cover it, it's going to sound very different, right? And so, this to me, I was like, oh, okay. I do understand now, but if they hadn't brought up this point, I wouldn't report who performed it because to me, it didn't seem necessary. So I am working with some people right now, and we are writing a paper in which we hope to create a list, like a basic list and a full list of things you should report when you're studying music for animals. Performer is one of them. Things like simple things like amplitude or loudness is another, but there will also be many others. So that is coming out next year sometime. We're writing it, so we will submit it for publication next year. But I will leave you with that. Thank you very much for your attention. Sorry if I went a bit over time. And if you have any questions or you want to contact me about any of this, my contact information is there. I also want to do a short plug that we are starting a working group on acoustic enrichment for animal welfare. And this includes music. So if you want to be involved in that or want to know more about it, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Pralle. That was a beautiful presentation, loaded with information, a lot of information.
Thank you.
I'll just have to suspend my own question maybe till later and go through the questions we have in the chat box. We have a lot of them. So I'll try to be fast and try to be, I'll plead that you try to be as fast as possible in answering them.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Okay, the first one is, I really like the idea of whether music is good versus no music. Have you read anything on the use of white noise and the concept of noise versus music?
Yeah, so there are studies that compare white noise versus music, and I think sometimes, for example, animals don't prefer white noise over music. They have an equal preference. And there are some cases, I think, in things like cognitive performance and some sort of in primate. I'm remembering one study where white noise facilitates cognitive performance, whereas something like music doesn't. It's distracting to them. So yeah, so white noise, I think, can have its benefit depending on how you use it. Again, as a masker, potentially lovely. But if it's to stimulate, something in a very boring environment, then perhaps not.
I see. Thank you. Okay, then the next one says, did you check how the music are played to the animals in your review? Are they played continuously or intermittently? Do you think this will have effect on behavioral response of the animals?
Yes, so some of the studies they play that continuously and they see how close the animal goes towards it, and some of them are triggered by the animal. So if animal sits here, then it plays this sound. If it sits there, it plays a different sound. It's a good question. I haven't looked into whether that makes a difference yet. My feeling is not really, but it's a good question and I will look into it in more detail. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Zeno Bennett said, your presentation is really interesting. Thank you. Do you think that animals that naturally make music, like the nightingale and other animals in category, are more likely to enjoy music? Okay, I think that's in line with Dr. Yasiri's question. And then secondly, do you think animals, according to their species, would prefer music, certain pitches than others? Having observed different breeds of dogs and chicken, I realized both animals react negatively to high-pitched music by shaking their heads vigorously in a bid to stop the music from getting into their ears. Not sure why they do that, but it's been observed. It's been an observation. So, what do you have to say about that?
So I do think that this. For example, there is a form and function in animal signals, and that sometimes gets translated to music. So, for example, they say that often when music is trying to evoke a particular emotion, like a negative emotion, you get things where it's increasing in pitch. Like think about increasing in pitch and, for example, increasing in tempo. So two really good examples are from what's called the Psycho movie, when he's about to stab her and there's like noise, right? That is quite, I don't know if that's necessarily positive. And there's also movies like Jaws, when it's the same sound but repeated and it feels like it's moving closer because it gets faster and faster and faster and faster. So I think there are some basic principles of, let's say, music that's used in animal communication to communicate the possibility of a positive or negative event. I think we've studied a lot more negative. There's much more patterns in negative events than positive ones, but that can be why. So for example, often alarm calls are usually high pitched, right? So often they're associated with a negative feeling. So if whatever music you were playing to the chicken or the dog matches a little bit the template for a distress call or something they know is bad, then it can trigger that behavior.
Oh, I see. Thank you. Then from Fami Idris said, my question is, does the display, shape, color, size of sounding device also affect the behavior of animals listening to it? The shape, color, and size of the device, does it affect the behavior?
I have no idea. The studies don't report often, or at least the details are not clear enough for me to understand whether there is a variation. I don't know, actually. I've never looked.
Oh, I see. Oh, I have another long question. Maria said, based on your review, would you recommend playing music in kennels or an inpatient area in a veterinary hospital, or perhaps even when a dog is left home alone? I am guessing there is not enough evidence to actually answer this, and there are many variables that can affect this answer. However, based on evidence to date, what would you suggest? I'm just wondering if more than good could be done by playing music. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and often one that has a very practical and important place. So with kennels, I think it's quite difficult. I know that people often play music in kennels so that the dogs don't bark so much. We don't know why. Again, it could be in this case some sort of masking, because if one dog hears another one barking, they're more likely to bark, and then everybody barks, and then everybody's freaked out.
Yeah.
Also in veterinary centers, for example, it might be an indirect effect. So if you're playing music and the human is calm, then the dog will be calm too. But again, like you said, these are kind of more of my opinions than the scientific literature. So I don't know if there is necessarily something negative about the music unless the animal has prior experience with it. For example, if it was mistreated and they always played even Mozart in the background while they were being mistreated, then of course that will trigger negative reactions to them. But I do think in the case of a vet, when you're bringing a dog to a vet, it's the effect on the person also that's important. They're social person. So if the person is nervous and scared, then the dog will be too. And for at home, I guess simulating a normal environment, in the sense that when you're home, there's usually sounds. So perhaps the dog feels less freaked out and stressed out if it hears sounds, and that's more of a normal state where things are happening as normal. Again, just opinions though. I hope they're useful.
Yeah. The question was dropped by Dr. Yasire. She said, could the lack of response of animals to music be related to music characteristics, maybe intensity, volumicity?
It could be. It's there isn't enough. There aren't enough to look at them systematically, right? It could be a lot of different things. For example, they look at I think loudness is actually one of them. So several, I think at least non-human primates tend to prefer softer sounds over louder sounds. But if you give them a choice, they prefer no sound. So yes, it's possible. But I do think that a lot of it has to do with prior exposure. So is the music familiar to the animal? I think that's an important one, about whether they actually like it or not later on.
Right. Thank you so much. We have a question from a food scientist. She said, this is Shobukola Olajide. She said, thank you for this interesting discourse, an eye-opener indeed. As a food scientist, it will be interesting to know the role played by animals that like music on their meat quality and storage stability. I'm not sure this has been investigated, although I joined the meeting. She came in late. So do you think it has effect on meat quality?
The closest I can think is that we know that our sound environment, in humans, music affects our taste. So we taste things differently depending on what we hear. So if this principle also works in animals, then perhaps, for example, you can get them to feed at different types of food, for example, to feed with different nutrient components, and that then affects meat quality. So I think there's potential there if sound also affects taste in animals.
Great. Thank you. From Dr. Samuel Drosaro, he said, how can animals perceive music? Um, okay, he said, how can animals perceive music to be studied? Then sometimes we play music that are melodious in our area to animals. How do we know if the music are melodious to the animals also?
Short answer is we don't. Unless we can get some clear signal of, yeah, some sort of, let's say, yeah, we're never going to know if it's melodious in the same way we understand it, I think. That we won't know, but at least we can know whether it's something the animal likes. We can study, for example, if it can differentiate between different melodic sequences. If it perceives this melody, like say happy birthday, is different from, I don't know, another one. Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, for example. But I don't think we'll ever really know what they perceive.
Okay, I see. Someone said, Izuchiku Martin said, do fishes have ear to hear sounds of music?
I'm not a fish expert, but some fish experts have told me recently that so fish can hear with swim bladders and the lateral lines on their body. So they feel, I think, sound more than they hear it because they live in water, and the sound we hear sound that's airborne. They feel sound that travels through water.
Okay, thank you. Then another from Abdul Rahman said, could animals be deliberately taught to appreciate music?
It depends what you mean by appreciate. If you're going to teach an animal to let's say to like it, then you can play whatever music you want and give it food and have that simple association of music equals food. It will like that music. Every time you turn on that music, it will get very excited. It will say, yippee, this is the best time of my life because I'm getting a reward from it. Now, appreciate, I don't know. For example, like appreciate suggests perhaps some sort of aesthetic component. And that's animal aesthetics is a whole other thing. So we don't even have a good measure of aesthetic yet.
Exactly.
So a future question, I think.
All right. Then another one from Inyujime Timothy said, can animals become adapted and much interested in music if they are exposed to it for a long time?
So they can get bored of it, I'm sure. Just like we can get bored of our favorite song, they can habituate to it. Yeah, so it can become boring. Yes.
I see. Oh, then another one from Izuchuku Martin, he said, in these research articles you have gathered, it seems that most studies have been carried out on wild animals. Would there be any research on the effect of music on farm animals, companion animals such as cats and dogs, as this area may draw more attention to farmers and pet owners? I know my friend plays a melodious 24 hours for his dog. Wow. Pigs and chicken, and they seem to love it. I love it too and wish to sleep there. But any research on these animals?
There is you're in luck. There is a lot of research on companion animals and farm animals and stuff. It's not included in this review because it didn't measure behavior the way that the way that I defined it. So for example, it will look at, for example, if music reduces stress-related behavior, or like corticosterone in chickens or cortisol in pigs, if it again increases tail wagging in pigs, if I think there probably also is stuff on horses, for example, if it reduces measures of stress in horses. But that's not the reason it's not in here is because it's not how I defined liking. So liking is really that you ask for it and you come towards it. But yes, if you want, you can send me an email, and I have a list of some of these review studies in which you can have a look. And there are lots of work done on farm animals and companion animals.
Great, thank you. Another one from Samuel Adeyeye said, can we know the animals that respond to music quickly? Probably the species. Or
Quickly meaning that they just
probably when after getting the response, after getting the stimuli, like how fast they respond to it, probably by species or
from what I've read, that's often not a not something that people look into. So there is a couple of studies when they look at the latency to respond. In this case, it's drumming events. So I include drumming events because, again, it's a rhythmic, but these are the monkeys actually making the drumming themselves. So they look at if they play drumming sounds compared to vocalizations, including things like distress calls, and compared to other types of sound, how fast does the animal turn and look? And drumming is one, they turn and they look faster to drumming than other sounds that the study presented.
Nice. Thank you. From Hildegard Neyman, he said, we trained African grey parrots to identify music. They preferred special songs and actors, so they seemed to dislike some songs and preferred others. Oh, nice to see.
Yeah, and I would love to know what you've studied with them. So please send me an email, and if you want to talk about it, I'd love to know what you've been doing with the African greys.
Great. Thank you so much. That's all we have from the chat box. Going to my question. I just want to know, you mentioned dopamine and its effect seemed to be much on animal behavior. But me, as an animal nutritionist, okay, I can say I've done little in animal nutrition. I'm curious to know if this music, of course, it should influence dopamine level. So, do you think this should, in long run, affect nutrients and maybe nutrient uptake, the way nutrients are being metabolized and utilized by animals?
Again, well, I can't think of any studies where they looked at peripheral stuff, but for example, there are some studies in rats suggesting that music lowers blood pressure because it interacts with calcium. But again, that's all in the brain, right? So I don't know of any studies that have tried to understand the effects of music on effects of music on physiology. Yes, for sure. There's lots of those, but whether it's related to liking. So if liking music has different effects on the body.
Oh, thank you so much. That's the end of the question and answer session, and I can say that we have learned a lot. I personally have learned a lot, and I know I'm speaking for the audience as well. Thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you again for inviting me. It was great. I really wanted to think about this more. So I'm glad you also learned something.
Thank you so much, Pralle, for this interesting presentation. We really have a lot to learn, and I'm so glad to see, diverse participants, from food science and, different. There's somebody here, a singer, Affair. Maybe the person is actually a singer, I don't know. But it's so exciting to see that this kind of topic actually brought a lot of people with different ideas and from different backgrounds together. Thank you so much for sharing insights on this. And I hope that maybe future research in this area would continue. So we'll be able to probe into animals and understand what actually they or how they perceive music, and what they can make out of it. It will be so interesting to see, how this could help enhance their welfare and also reduce the stress level, and then have impact on maybe the meat quality and also the quality of the food that we are eating, because this would be like a non-invasive